My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 34, and for the longest time, I truly believed that keeping my distance from my family would buy me peace. I didn't storm out of our lives. There were no dramatic exits, no accusations hurled across dinner tables, just a quiet, deliberate shift. I moved away from Indiana to Boulder, Colorado. I built my own life small house, thriving branding consultancy, yoga every Thursday, and the kind of silence that felt earned. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I just needed room to breathe. Growing up, the Monroe family had a very clear hierarchy. Respect was tied to proximity. If you stayed close geographically and emotionally, you earned your place. I didn't fit. I asked too many questions. I didn't go to church every Sunday. I didn't laugh at Uncle Paul's jokes or pretend I admired my sister Vanessa's suburban perfection, so I did the unthinkable. I stepped away. The distance helped. At first, I could breathe again. No more tension headaches after dinners. No more walking on eggshells to avoid being the difficult niece or the selfish daughter. I still participated when it felt right. Sent gifts. Paid my share into the Monroe Family Trust, a fund my grandfather started decades ago to help family members in times of need. I honored it. Every year. Without fail. I contributed. Even when no one ever acknowledged it. It wasn't about applause, it was about doing what was right, or at least what I thought was right. Then came the Easter brunch, the one that changed everything. Samantha, my cousin and probably the only person in the family who ever made me feel seen, texted me the week before, "Hope you're coming. I told Aunt Lorraine to save you a seat by me." It should have felt warm, reassuring even, but I hesitated. I already knew how it would go. I'd walk in and feel the energy in the room shift. My mom, Evelyn, would offer her signature tight smile, sharp, polished, and cold. Paul would make some crack about me finally remembering I had a family. Lorraine, of course, would pretend I didn't exist unless she could use me as a punchline. I knew all of it, and still, I showed up. I wore a navy blouse, brought a chilled bottle of rosé, and picked out a bouquet of pink peonies for Lorraine. The moment I stepped through that front door, everything in me tensed. The house smelled like cinnamon rolls and ham, just like it always did. The voices, the laughter, it was all so familiar and distant at once. I was no longer part of it, not really. I walked in and saw Lorraine near the dining table, arranging food like she was coordinating a wedding. She glanced at me, blinked, then walked over with that frozen smile she perfected decades ago. Her eyes skimmed my blouse, then locked with mine. Her voice, syrupy sweet and just loud enough to echo, "This table's for family only." At first, I thought I misunderstood. Maybe it was a joke, but there was no humor, just icy dismissal. I looked at Samantha. Her face turned ghost white. My mom, sipping her mimosa at the far end, didn't even look up when she added, "You made your choice when you moved out." There I was, holding flowers in one hand and wine in the other, and for a moment, I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was surreal, like watching yourself walk into a room you've already been exiled from. No words came. I just turned, walked back out, and didn't stop until I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel, stunned. No anger, no tears, just numb. How many years had I tried to keep the peace? How many times had I shown up, stayed quiet, smiled through the discomfort just to be told I wasn't family enough? I stared at the bouquet in my lap, now wilting, and felt a strange kind of calm, the kind that creeps in when you realize the illusion is finally shattered. Then came the texts. "I'm leaving," Samantha wrote. That was disgusting. A minute later, "We're with you, give us a second," through my windshield. I watched as Sam stood up, whispered something to her mother, and walked out. Her husband followed. Then came Ben, my younger cousin who always said I gave him the courage to pursue his own business. Then Daniel, then Claire. 5 of them in total. By the time dessert hit the table inside, half the chairs were empty. I didn't plan what came next. I didn't plot revenge while sitting there in that car, but something clicked. For the first time in years, I saw the lines clearly: who stood with me and who would rather keep up appearances. I thought of the trust fund, the one I kept contributing to, quietly, dutifully. Even though no one ever acknowledged me, I realized I'd been sustaining the very people who treated me like a ghost. Back home that evening, I had 3 voicemails, one from Samantha just checking in, saying she loved me, one from Daniel, tentative, asking if we could talk, and one from my mother. Her voice was tight, emotionless, like she'd rehearsed every syllable. I don't know what kind of scene you thought you were making. Rachel, you embarrassed your family. This needs to stop. I didn't respond. I logged into the Monroe Trust dashboard instead. Technically, I wasn't just a contributor. There was a clause my grandfather wrote into the trust years ago, one nobody ever thought would matter. The first grandchild to become financially independent without using the trust would receive co-administrator privileges. Everyone laughed at it. My mom called it quaint, but I built my consultancy from the ground up, paid off my student loans early, and never touched the fund. I met the criteria. I earned the key. My grandfather pulled me aside once, years before he passed. He said, "The trust will save this family, but only if the right person watches the vault." At the time, I thought he meant money, but now I wasn't so sure. That night, I began reviewing the logs. Dozens of transactions, thousands of dollars, labeled home improvements, education, medical hardship, but the details were damning. Uncle Paul, with a 6-figure salary, withdrew 3 times in the last year alone. My sister Vanessa took $8,000 for a certification course she never finished. Lorraine, a $6,500 reimbursement for liposuction. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was colder, focused. I wasn't going to yell or rant. I wasn't going to throw a tantrum. I was going to do something much more dangerous. And it would start with one quiet email that no one would see coming. The next morning, I drafted the email, not to anyone in the family, at least not yet. It was addressed to the fiduciary firm that managed the Monroe Family Trust. I requested a temporary freeze on all non-emergency withdrawals, citing irregularities in fund use and potential misrepresentation. I knew exactly what that language would trigger: an internal compliance review. No one would be able to touch a dollar without a formal process and documentation. No one could accuse me of overreach. It was just a routine audit. On paper, it was clean, but under the surface, I had flipped the first domino. The email went out at 9:32 a.m. By 10:10, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, group texts, emails with subject lines in all caps. Access denied. Why is my request pending? What did you do? Rachel. I didn't reply. Not yet. Not until they felt what I had felt at that Easter brunch: powerless, unacknowledged, voiceless. I received an email from Aunt Lorraine at 11:03 a.m. Subject: inappropriate overstep. CC'd my mother, Uncle Paul, Vanessa, and half the extended cousins. Her tone was that perfect cocktail of weaponized civility and veiled threat. I'm concerned about Rachel's recent actions regarding the trust. These decisions appear to be emotionally driven and potentially unstable. I've contacted my attorney to review the legality of the current administrative structure. And then, the sentence that sat like acid in my stomach: frankly, Rachel has never demonstrated the temperament or loyalty necessary to serve as a steward of this family's legacy. I stared at that line longer than I should have. Never demonstrated loyalty. The words stung. Not because they were true, but because of how familiar they felt. That same cold judgment had trailed me since I was old enough to have an opinion. I was the daughter who moved too far, worked too hard, and talked too little. The kind who could write a check to the trust fund every year and still be called ungrateful. But what none of them knew was that the trust wasn't the only thing Grandpa had left in my care. Years ago, over one of our Sunday breakfasts, dry rye toast, eggs over medium, black coffee, he'd leaned in and said, "The lake house. They think it's still in my name. It's not. I moved it into yours. Quietly, legally. Taxes go through a shell company. It's clean. That place belongs to you now. I don't want it to become another party venue. I want someone who earned it to protect it." At the time, I thought it was sentimental. Now I understood it was strategic. They had turned it into a shrine for themselves. Every summer, barbecues. Every fall, baby showers. Vanessa held her engagement dinner there. Paul hosted his 50th birthday. Lorraine planned an annual book club retreat. And not once did anyone ask my permission. Because they didn't know, or they didn't care, or maybe both. I pulled up the deed. There it was, my name, my right, a thick file of tax returns, notarized statements, and a letter from Grandpa confirming it all. It was real. It was mine. And suddenly, I knew what the next step had to be. I drafted another email, this one to my mother. Subject: Lake House Access Notice. Body: Since I am apparently not considered family, I assume you will understand my decision to exercise my legal right as sole property owner of the Monroe Lake House. Effective immediately. All events scheduled at the house are canceled. The locks will be changed this Friday. Please inform any relevant parties. Rachel. I hit send. Then I sat in the silence. Not anxious, not vengeful, just still. It felt clean. By that evening, the Monroe family group chat had combusted. Samantha sent me screenshots like she was live reporting a forest fire. My mom's first message was all caps. Who do you think you are? Paul followed up with, you can't just steal family property, Lorraine. Of course. Pulled the moral high ground. Your grandfather would be ashamed. That one stopped me. Your grandfather would be ashamed. They didn't know him. Not the way I did. Not the man who pulled me aside at 24 and said, keep your power close. And don't let people mistake silence for weakness. That line stayed with me. It was no longer about retaliation. It was about revelation. The kind that cracked open the core of everything I had once tried to preserve. The next morning, my cousin Daniel left a voicemail. His voice was cautious. Hey Rachel, I know I haven't always stood up when I should have, and I don't know everything that's going on, but I think they're finally realizing you're the only one who ever acted with integrity. If you want to talk, I'm here. That voicemail mattered more than I expected. Daniel had always been the observer, the one who stood in the corner of family events, watching, not speaking, too scared to confront, too decent to join in the cruelty. Maybe he was ready to stop watching. That afternoon, the knock on my door was inevitable. I opened it to find my mother. She didn't even wait to be invited in, just brushed past me like nothing had changed. She clutched her purse like a lifeline and took her usual spot on the sofa, like she still owned the space. We need to talk. I leaned against the doorframe. About what? Her voice was tight. The trust, the lake house, this drama. Do you even realize how this looks to the rest of the family? I raised an eyebrow. That's your concern? How it looks? You're acting like a spoiled child. That word sliced deep. I exhaled once. You let Lorraine humiliate me in front of everyone. You called my silence a scene. Now you're standing here asking me to pretend none of it happened and I'm the child. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for a line that would fix this. There wasn't one. I stepped forward. You told me I made my choice when I left. Well, now I'm telling you this is your choice. You don't get to shut me out and still expect me to foot the bill. Her voice cracked. This isn't you. You're not cruel. No, I said calmly, I'm not, but I'm done being complicit. She left without another word, and I didn't chase her. That night, Samantha called. They're scrambling. She said, Paul tried to book the lake house for his daughter's graduation party next weekend. Found out real quick it's not available. Lorraine called the property manager and threw a fit. He hung up on her. I let out a dry laugh, predictable. She paused. There's more. They're planning a family meeting at Grandma's. They want to discuss options. Try to pressure you into undoing everything. Paul even floated the idea of removing you as co-administrator. My fingers tightened around the phone. Let them try. I said, they won't like what happens next. What they didn't know was that I had already started working with a lawyer. Grandpa's clause didn't just grant me co-administration, it gave me power of amendment. I could revise the trust to protect it from misuse. I hadn't signed the paperwork yet. I was waiting for them to show their teeth. Now I didn't attend the family meeting. Instead, at exactly 6:00 p.m., the precise time they were scheduled to gather in Grandma's floral wallpapered living room, likely circling trays of finger sandwiches and brewing faux-concerned monologues, I opened my email, attached 2 files, and typed one sentence. Dear family, please find attached the amended trust bylaws and the legal notice of restructure, effective immediately. The first attachment was the formal amendment, signed and notarized, filed with the Fiduciary Oversight Board. The second was a letter from my attorney, professionally worded but as sharp as broken glass. It laid everything out plainly. Following repeated misuse of funds, failure to maintain contributor transparency, and targeted harassment of a sitting trustee, the Monroe Family Trust will undergo a formal reorganization. Effective immediately, all non-contributing beneficiaries are suspended pending financial review. All withdrawals require documentation and board approval. Any beneficiary found guilty of discriminatory behavior, misrepresentation, or exclusion will be permanently removed. The trust will now be administered by a third-party fiduciary board, including external auditors to ensure accountability. This is not revenge. This is restoration. The trust will return to what it was meant to be: support, not entitlement. I didn't CC anyone, I sent it to everyone. And then I turned off my phone. Outside, the sun was dropping behind the hills, staining the sky in streaks of copper and rust. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch, legs curled under me, letting the silence settle like dust. For once, I wasn't waiting for a reaction. I wasn't anticipating the fallout. I was simply breathing. But I knew it would come. By morning, my phone was a digital war zone. 37 missed calls, 19 voicemails, 113 text messages. Some were furious, some pathetic, some just stunned. My mother left 3 voicemails, one rambling, one furious, one whispering like she was hiding in a church pew. Paul's message was loud enough to hear through the notification preview. "You have no right." Lorraine, ever the dramatist, emailed the entire extended family with the subject line, "Our family's crisis." She called me vindictive, emotionally unstable, and claimed Grandpa's legacy had been hijacked by someone who never believed in us. But the truth was, I believed in them once. I just stopped believing in the version they kept pretending to be. Later that day, I received a quiet email from Daniel. "You just lit a match in a room soaked in gasoline. I'm proud of you." And then Chelsea. They're panicking. Paul scrambling to undo everything. Lorraine called her lawyer. "My mom is pretending she's always supported you." It's chaos, but the kind we needed. It wasn't just chaos, it was clarity. I logged into the trust account dashboard and reviewed the audit reports. Over $280,000 in questionable disbursements in the past 5 years. Paul had filed multiple home repair reimbursements for the same air conditioner. Lorraine had categorized a luxury cruise as medical recuperation. My sister Vanessa had withdrawn $8,000 for education, but there were no course records, just spa receipts and yoga apparel charges. I wasn't angry anymore. I had moved past that. This wasn't about rage. It was about boundaries, about ending the cycle of manipulation disguised as tradition. That night, I began revising the beneficiary roster. Daniel was the first person I contacted. I invited him to submit a formal proposal for a sustainable landscaping business, something he'd talked about years ago when he felt too small to act on his dreams. He submitted a plan within 3 days. Detailed, modest, honest. I approved it. Within 2 weeks, he sent me a picture of his first rooftop garden, lush greens over a public elementary school in Oakland. This was always what it should have been for. He texted, "We had restructured the trust into 3 arms: emergency medical relief, educational scholarships, and small business grants. Everything required documentation. Everything was reviewed by the new board, including me and Chelsea, who had formally accepted a co-administrator position. She was relentless in ensuring that every decision was grounded in integrity. I trusted her more than anyone." Meanwhile, the old guard did what they always did. They tried to twist the story. Paul threatened legal action, claiming I'd usurped control. He even tried to rally the other cousins to challenge the amendment, not realizing Grandpa's clause was watertight. Lorraine launched a smear campaign on Facebook, cryptic posts about betrayal, family dictatorships, and loyalty. One post tagged me, saying, "Real family doesn't throw you out." I blocked her. Vanessa said nothing, just disappeared, silent, distant, and perhaps finally confronting the reality that her trust-funded luxuries had a limit. Part of me felt grief. Another part felt relief. I had spent years mourning the version of her I wanted to believe in. Maybe this was just closure. Then there was my mother. She went quiet for nearly a month. No texts, no guilt trips, no whispers, and then, on my 35th birthday, she showed up, no warning, just walked into the backyard where I was grilling with Daniel and Chelsea. She looked smaller somehow, older. She held a small box wrapped in linen and said nothing at first. I didn't speak either, just nodded toward an empty chair. She sat. Inside the box was a birthday card. No fancy handwriting, just 5 words. Thank you for making things better. I didn't know how to respond, I still don't. We didn't have a heart-to-heart. There were no sudden apologies, no sweeping hugs, just quiet, present. Maybe that was enough. For now. Back at the lake house, things had changed, the dock was repaired, the grill replaced, the guest list shortened. Every visitor had to ask first, and when they did, I listened. I said yes to the ones who never needed to manipulate their way in. No to those who never thought they'd have to. One summer night, Chelsea and I hosted a small barbecue. Daniel brought his partner. A few cousins who had reached out with sincerity came too. No Lorraine, no Paul, no Vanessa. As the sun dipped below the tree line, I sat at the edge of the dock, bare feet grazing the water, and remembered Grandpa's words, "Keep your head down, but keep your power close." For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of their opinions. I was carrying the legacy forward, on my terms. The storm hadn't just passed, it had revealed who was worth sheltering. And the ones left in the cold, they were never mine to save. 2 months passed, and for the first time in my adult life, peace didn't feel like a performance. The lake house, once a monument to family dysfunction, was becoming something new. The rooms echoed less. The air felt lighter. There were fewer voices, but they were honest. Fewer footsteps, but no one stomped in entitlement. Daniel's business was flourishing. His first big commercial contract, green roofing for a tech campus, was approved after the trust matched his initial investment. Chelsea and I helped him navigate the paperwork. She'd become a quiet force, the one who asked the hard questions, the one who double-checked every line item. She made the trust accountable in ways Grandpa would have respected. We launched the first educational scholarship under the new structure 2 weeks later. The recipient, a distant cousin's daughter, a soft-spoken 18-year-old named Marissa, who wanted to study environmental science but never asked because her father said it was a waste of money. She sent us a handwritten letter after her award was announced. "You didn't just fund my future, you reminded me I deserve one." That letter still sits on my desk. And then came the silence from the rest of them. Paul, after his lawsuit fizzled like a wet match, fell back into brooding. According to Chelsea, he stopped coming to family dinners and started telling people I poisoned the tree. Lorraine, not to be outdone, posted increasingly bizarre online monologues about betrayal, generational curses, and how the lake house had lost its soul. The irony, of course, was that the lake house never had a soul, it only ever reflected the people in it. Vanessa remained a ghost. She didn't respond to the official letter revoking her automatic beneficiary status, didn't challenge the audit that showed she'd spent nearly $30,000 over 3 years without accountability. She simply faded from every chat, every group thread, every holiday Zoom call, a slow erasure. But my mother, that was different. It started slowly. She began replying to Chelsea's messages. Then she commented on a photo I posted, just a smile emoji. No words. Then, 3 weeks after my birthday dinner, she called, not to argue, not to beg, just to ask if I wanted to have coffee. I said yes. We met at a quiet cafe near the old downtown square. She was already seated when I arrived, fingers folded over a plain white napkin. Her smile was tentative, her eyes heavier than I remembered. She looked at me the way people look at someone returning from war, grateful, unsure, a little afraid. "I don't know where to begin," she said. "You don't have to begin, you can just speak," I replied. She told me things I didn't expect, that she'd spent years trying to keep the peace without realizing she was choosing comfort over courage, that she was raised to believe loyalty meant silence, that her biggest fear wasn't losing face, but being alone if she ever spoke up. "I thought I was protecting you by smoothing things over," she whispered, "but I was just letting them treat you like less. I see that now." I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just listened, because for the first time, her words weren't coded in guilt or demands. They were raw, exposed, human. We talked for an hour, then two. When we finally stood to leave, she placed her hand lightly on my wrist and said, "You changed things. I didn't think it was possible, but you did." I walked back to my car feeling both lighter and heavier. Grief and healing sometimes walk hand in hand. It's not always clean, it rarely is. Back at the lake house, the summer was shifting into fall. The trees began to blush orange and rust. Chelsea suggested we host a reclamation dinner, an evening for those who chose honesty over entitlement. She called it that because it wasn't just a family dinner. It was a reclaiming of space, meaning, and connection. We invited those who'd stood with us. Daniel and his partner brought fresh vegetables from their urban garden. Marissa and her mom came, wide-eyed and grateful. A couple of cousins who'd stayed quiet during the chaos but had never participated in the cruelty asked to bring their children. We cooked together, laughed without suspicion, and toasted with apple cider on the back deck. The lake mirrored the sky. There were no speeches, no grandstanding, just a quiet kind of joy that only comes after a storm has finally passed. Later that night, Chelsea and I sat by the fireplace, reviewing new applications for business grants. She leaned her head against the back of the chair and said, "Do you think they regret it?" "Which part?" I asked. "Losing access or losing you?" I didn't answer right away. I said finally, "they regret losing control. But the rest, I don't know if they ever truly saw me to begin with. Maybe that's the whole point." The next morning, I found an envelope taped to the front door of the lake house. No name, no stamp, just to the real owner. Inside was a card. It was from Lorraine. "I don't agree with how you did things, but maybe that's because I never had to fight for anything. You did, and you won. I don't expect forgiveness, just needed you to know that." It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a crack in the armor, and that's how it often begins. In the weeks that followed, Chelsea proposed starting a mentorship program through the trust, not just giving money, but helping recipients build something lasting. She wanted to call it Legacy Forward. I agreed without hesitation. We wrote the first mission statement together. We don't preserve tradition by staying silent. We honor legacy by protecting its purpose. As we prepared to send out the first round of invitations, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was Vanessa. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how to face you. I still don't, but I'm tired of hiding. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I finally had a choice. And this time, I would choose carefully when I finally agreed to meet Vanessa. We didn't go to a cafe or a family home. We met at a park, neutral ground, a Sunday afternoon. Leaves brittle underfoot. The sky the color of ash. She was already seated on the bench when I arrived, hunched slightly, hands in her coat pockets like a teenager waiting for detention to end. She stood when she saw me but didn't move closer. Her face, once so familiar, looked older, not aged, just weighed down. We stared at each other for a long second, then both sat without speaking. "I won't waste your time," she said. "I was a coward. I knew what they were doing was wrong. I knew what you contributed, what you carried. She paused, jaw tightening. I thought staying out of it meant staying safe, but silence isn't safe. It's just quiet complicity." I didn't answer, not yet. "I know I don't deserve anything from the trust. I'm not here to ask. I just want you to know." Her voice cracked. "I never stopped being proud of you. I was just too small to say it." That's the thing about honesty. When it finally breaks through, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's whispered. Sometimes it arrives years too late but still matters. I looked at her, not with the cold detachment I once practiced, but with a strange kind of sadness. Not for what she did, for what we lost. "I don't need an apology." I said. "I needed acknowledgement. And you gave that?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "So, what now?" I didn't have a clean answer. Life doesn't always give us Act 3 closure. It just gives us the choice to keep or break the cycle. So I said the only true thing I could: we rebuild or we don't. That's on us. She smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, it wasn't forced. Later that month, the Legacy Forward program launched. Chelsea and I hosted a small welcome event at the lake house. New beneficiaries, mostly young, hopeful, driven people with real vision, stood where old family gatherings used to unfold with tension and hierarchy. Now, there was laughter that didn't come with strings, conversations that didn't have to be decoded, and a fire pit by the lake, where someone read Marissa's acceptance letter aloud. Her words still echoed with the kind of hope this place hadn't seen in decades. My mom came that night too. She didn't speak much. She just stood at the edge of the porch for a while, watching the lights ripple on the lake's surface. Then she turned to me and said, "It feels different now, like maybe we're finally using it for what he wanted." "He?" I asked. "Your grandfather." I looked out across the water, remembering him, his hands weathered, voice even, eyes sharp beneath his age. He wasn't perfect, but he believed in something. Something more than just appearances and family photos. He believed in responsibility, in doing hard things quietly. And now, I finally understood what he meant when he said the trust could save the family. It wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about forcing the truth into the open and holding it there, steady, until someone chose to build something better from it. Weeks turned into months. Vanessa emailed Chelsea offering to volunteer with financial literacy sessions. Daniel sent us updates on his business, now expanding into 2 counties. Marissa's grades were top tier, and my mom, she didn't become a different person overnight, but she called more, asked real questions, listened without defensiveness. That, in itself, was a kind of quiet miracle. As winter crept in and the lake froze over, I found myself walking the dock again, alone this time. The wind was sharp, the sky soft and heavy. I sat at the edge, same spot Grandpa used to sit with his thermos of coffee, and I thought about everything that had burned. The lies, the entitlement, the silence that once choked the life from this place. It had cost something, all of it, but from that fire, something cleaner had emerged. Not perfect, but honest and lasting. They say inheritance is about what's passed down, but that's not always money or property. Sometimes, the real inheritance is what you choose to change, what you choose to protect, and who you choose to become when no one's clapping. I didn't need them to approve. I didn't need to be welcomed back. Because I hadn't walked away from the family. I'd stayed. I just refused to be erased from it. And that made all the difference. Story 2. My name is Rachel, and I'm 27 years old. If you asked anyone in my family, they'd probably say I'm the responsible one, the one who never causes trouble, who always follows the rules, who never rocks the boat. What they wouldn't say, but what has quietly haunted me for years, is that I'm also the invisible one. The backdrop to my brother Mason's spotlight. My parents used to call him their golden boy. And not ironically, he was charming, athletic, the kind of guy who could talk his way out of a felony with nothing but a wink. Meanwhile, I was the honor roll student, the one who worked part-time jobs and still graduated early. I paid my own way through college while Mason bounced from one failed job to the next, always somehow landing on his feet, usually on top of mine. Still, I tried not to let the resentment fester. I kept my distance emotionally, especially after I moved to Chicago and started my own life. I had a steady job at a legal firm, a quiet apartment, and most recently, a fiancé, Marcus, who was patient, thoughtful, and everything Mason wasn't. I thought maybe that meant I had finally broken free of the family pattern, that I could build something of my own that didn't involve being the backup plan for everyone else's failures. I was wrong. It started when Grandma June passed away last year. She wasn't wealthy, but she was thoughtful. She'd always seen me, really seen me, even when no one else did. Her will left $80,000 split evenly between Mason and me, a small fortune to us. But more than that, it felt like a final nod from someone who remembered how hard I had worked, how overlooked I had been. Mason, of course, was named executor of the estate. My parents thought it was practical. He's the oldest. They said, he knows how to handle this stuff. I knew better, but I said nothing. Again. Weeks passed, then months. No check, no update, every time I called. Mason had a new excuse. The accounts are a mess. He said, lawyers are slow. He shrugged. My parents echoed his words like gospel, adding, just be patient. Sweetie, don't ruin the family peace over money. But it wasn't about money, it was about something deeper, about being invisible, about being lied to again and again. And so, I did something I'd never done before. I went behind everyone's back and hired a probate attorney. What we found hit me like a cold slap. Mason had already closed the estate, liquidated the account, he'd forged my signature to do it, every cent gone, $80,000, spent on a new SUV, a Vegas weekend, and God knows what else. I felt a slow-burning rage coil inside me. Not explosive, not dramatic, just solid, heavy, final. I gave him chances. I texted, called, even offered to settle privately. His response, "You're being dramatic, don't be so uptight." He even had the gall to call me greedy. So I did what he thought I'd never do. I filed a lawsuit. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not Marcus, not even Aunt Clara, my only real ally in the family. I timed the notice carefully. It would be delivered the week of Thanksgiving, just ahead of our family dinner. My first time attending in years. They thought I was coming home for turkey and reconciliation, but I had something else in mind. I wasn't there for peace. I was there for the truth. And for the first time in my life, I was going to make them look straight at it. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud, it's lawful. Thanksgiving Day arrived with the kind of chill that seeps through your coat and makes you question every decision that led you outside. Marcus drove while I sat quietly, the envelope resting like a loaded weapon in my purse. He didn't ask what was inside. He didn't have to. He'd seen the late-night emails, the court filings, the look in my eyes when I got the confirmation from the probate office. Marcus is the kind of man who doesn't need explanations, he just shows up. And that morning, he showed up wearing his nicest blazer, holding my hand without a word as we pulled into my parents' driveway. The house hadn't changed. Same creaky porch, same wind chimes Mom insisted were good energy, even though they sounded like a ghost orchestra in a thunderstorm. Inside, everything smelled like overcooked stuffing and sugar-glazed guilt. My mom greeted us with her usual forced warmth, her eyes scanning my face for signs of softness. I gave her none. My dad clapped Marcus on the back, pretending nothing had ever been broken between us. But the real showstopper, as always, was Mason. He walked in late, laughing like the star of his own sitcom. Wearing a Rolex I'm pretty sure he didn't pay for. His girlfriend, some blonde influencer type I'd never met, trailed behind him with a glazed smile and a rhinestone clutch. Mason winked at me like we were in on some shared joke. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I smiled, kissed Aunt Clara on the cheek, and sat down at the far end of the table. Dinner was a performance. My mom flitted from dish to dish, pretending not to notice the tension. My dad told tired jokes. Mason dominated the room with stories about his business ventures, which I knew were code for failure and debt. Every once in a while, he'd throw a barb my way about my job, my quiet nature, even Marcus, who sat there like a stone wall, refusing to rise to the bait, still working for other people. Rach, Mason said between bites of turkey, "You should let me help you invest that law firm salary." I didn't respond, not yet. Then came the toast. Mason stood, tapping his wine glass with a butter knife like he was about to give a wedding speech. Everyone fell silent. He launched into a monologue about how grateful he was for family, how tough times made us stronger, how blood is thicker than water. Then, with a smirk so smug I could practically smell it, he raised his glass toward me and said, "Here's to family well, most of it." Laughter erupted. Even Mom giggled. Hiding behind her napkin, I looked at Marcus, who gave me the faintest nod. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. No fanfare, no drama, just placed it, quietly and deliberately, in front of Mason's plate. He froze. The laughter died like someone had turned off the sound. "What's this?" he asked, still smirking. "Your holiday card." "Something like that," I said. He opened it. His eyes moved across the page. Slowly, then faster. The smirk disappeared. His face drained of color. And for once in his life, Mason was speechless. My mom reached for the paper. Her mouth opened, then closed. My dad snatched it, reading with a growing flush in his cheeks. Mason's girlfriend leaned over to peek, then recoiled like it was on fire. "What the hell is this?" "Rachel," my father barked. "A notice of legal action," I said evenly. "A courtesy copy. The official one's coming next week." "You're suing your own brother over money." My mom's voice cracked, her eyes filling with tears, but not the kind I expected, not regret, not remorse, just shame. For me. I'm suing the man who forged my signature and stole $80,000 from me. I said, I gave him chances. He laughed in my face. This isn't about family anymore. It's about accountability. And with that, I stood. Marcus followed. No one stopped us. No one moved. The silence in the room was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. We walked out without looking back. But the real story was only just beginning. Because when you finally confront a lifetime of silence, you don't just burn bridges. You build something stronger, your own foundation. The fallout wasn't instant, but it was inevitable. By the time Marcus and I got back to our apartment that night, my phone had exploded with missed calls and frantic texts, first from Mason, then from Mom, then even from my uncle who hadn't spoken to me in over 2 years. They all said the same thing in different flavors. You overreacted. You've humiliated the family. Can't you just fix this quietly? Not a single message asked me if I was okay. Not one. Mason called 12 times in a row. On the 13th, I finally answered. His voice was strained, still putting on the usual cocky tone, but laced with something I hadn't heard from him in years. Fear. Rach. Come on, you don't want to do this. Think about Mom. Think about what this is going to do to her. He sounded like a kid trying to avoid detention, not a grown man who had committed fraud. I let him speak, let him beg, until I quietly said, "You should have thought about that before you stole from me," and hung up. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, family drama, and phone calls I didn't return. My mother left me a voicemail crying so hard I could barely understand her. She wasn't upset about what Mason had done. She was upset that I'd made it public, that I'd shattered the family's perfect image. Dad didn't even bother pretending to mediate. His message was blunt. If you go through with this, don't expect to be welcome here again. I didn't flinch. Instead, I dove headfirst into the legal process. My lawyer, Naomi, a sharp, relentless woman with zero patience for manipulators, helped me build an airtight case. We gathered bank records, transaction logs, digital trails that led straight from Grandma's estate to Mason's private investment account. I even had screenshots of texts where he joked to a friend about cashing out early and getting double the inheritance. The pièce de résistance was a voicemail he'd left me by mistake, thinking he'd hung up, laughing with his girlfriend about how I'd never see a cent. Meanwhile, my parents rallied behind him. Of course they did. Mom told extended family I was trying to ruin Mason's life over a misunderstanding. Dad emailed relatives a long, rambling defense of Mason's good heart and how Rachel has always been sensitive. They didn't deny the facts. They just denied my right to be angry about them. That was the part that hurt the most, not the theft, not even the lies. It was realizing that even with proof in hand, my pain didn't matter. But Marcus stood firm. When the stress started eating at me, he cooked, cleaned, sat with me through every anxiety spiral. He didn't offer empty advice, he offered presence. You're doing the hard thing. He'd whisper when I doubted myself. That's what people with integrity do. 3 weeks before the court hearing, Mason sent a settlement offer. It was insulting half the inheritance and a signed NDA. My lawyer laughed. He's scared, Naomi said. If he's making offers, he knows we've got him. Still, I hesitated. Not because I was tempted by the money, but because I knew what came next would be ugly. A public hearing. More family rage. More isolation. But I remembered every time they'd made me feel small. Every time I was told to just get over it. Every joke at my expense. Every holiday where I was invisible. Every moment I was expected to carry the weight so Mason could coast. I declined the offer. I chose the fight. And just like that, I was no longer the quiet one, the good daughter, the reliable fixer. I was the problem, the disruptor, the woman who wouldn't keep the family's dirty secrets anymore. But what none of them understood is that I wasn't trying to tear us apart. I was trying to finally stand up for the part of me they'd always ignored, and for the first time in my life, I was willing to lose them all to protect her. The morning of the court hearing arrived gray and cold. Like even the weather knew it was Judgment Day. Marcus drove us downtown, the silence between us heavy but steady. He squeezed my hand at every red light, but didn't say much. He knew I wasn't looking for reassurance. I just needed someone beside me who wouldn't let go. When we arrived at the courthouse, Mason was already there, pacing in the hallway in a cheap navy suit that didn't quite fit. and a smug expression that didn't quite hide his nerves. His lawyer, a slick-looking man with too much gel in his hair and a Bluetooth in one ear, nodded curtly at us. Naomi didn't acknowledge them. She breezed past like they were invisible, and I followed her lead. We were seated in the courtroom, Naomi on my right, Marcus just behind me, and then the session began. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight knot, called the case. When Mason's lawyer launched into his opening remarks, he tried to spin the entire ordeal as a private family dispute that had escalated unnecessarily due to miscommunication. He used words like misunderstanding, family strain, emotional context. He painted Mason as a stressed-out executor who had simply struggled with the responsibility and didn't want to burden anyone. I felt my hands clench, but Naomi placed hers gently over mine. Then she stood up and began her methodical, ruthless dismantling. First came the bank statement's hard numbers showing the transfer of the estate funds directly into Mason's personal investment accounts. Then the emails and texts, including the ones where Mason had assured me that things were just delayed. Naomi even had a screen recording of a Zoom call where Mason stated he'd already put it all in crypto, not realizing his mic was still on. Then she played the voicemail, the one where Mason laughed about how I'd never see a cent. The room went dead silent. The judge stared at him over the rim of her glasses like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. Mason's lawyer fumbled through objections. The judge waved them off, and when it was Mason's turn to testify, he crumbled. He tried to claim I'd verbally told him to handle things his way. Naomi asked, "Do you have any written confirmation of that?" He stammered, "Well, no, but..." "So your defense hinges on a verbal agreement that no one else witnessed and that directly contradicts the will?" The judge leaned forward and said, "Mr. Westbrook, are you aware that forging documents is a felony?" Mason's face turned a color I didn't know existed, somewhere between ash and beetroot. The ruling came quicker than I expected. The judge didn't even let the defense finish closing arguments. She found in my favor $80,000 in full restitution, $15,000 in emotional damages, plus legal fees, and most damning of all, a recorded finding of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, which meant Mason's professional reputation was now irreparably stained. The judge even authorized a lien on his assets and approved wage garnishment if he failed to pay voluntarily. As the verdict was read, I didn't feel victorious, I felt clean, like I'd finally stepped out of a fog that had been clinging to me for years. Mason didn't look at me. He stared at the floor like if he didn't move, maybe he could disappear. Outside the courtroom, my parents were waiting. My mother lunged at me, red-faced and tearful. "How could you do this to your own brother?" she wailed. "You embarrassed him. You embarrassed us." My father stood behind her, arms crossed, silent but burning with judgment. I took a breath and looked her in the eye. "Funny," I said. "I've been asking myself the same question for years. How could he do this to me? And you all just let him." I turned my back on them for the last time. As Marcus and I walked down the courthouse steps, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time all day. It was a small thing, but it felt like something was finally shifting. But freedom, as I'd soon realize, wasn't just about winning a case, it was about deciding what kind of life came next. And that part, as it turned out, was just beginning. After the verdict, something inside me finally shifted like a knot I didn't even realize I'd been carrying my whole life had come undone. But freedom wasn't as clean as I thought it would be. It didn't come with applause or closure. It came with silence. Deafening, isolating silence. For the first few days, I waited half hoping, half dreading for another barrage of messages from my parents or from Mason, but nothing came. Just an eerie stillness, like the storm had passed but left behind wreckage no one wanted to acknowledge. Naomi called it the emotional hangover of justice, sweet but sharp and surprisingly lonely. Marcus and I returned home that evening, and for the first time in what felt like months, I slept through the night, no waking up in a cold sweat, no rehearsing imaginary conversations with my family. Just sleep, clean, unburdened rest. In the following days, I started sorting through the pieces of what life looked like without them. No more Sunday calls out of obligation. No more walking on eggshells during holidays. No more waiting to be chosen by a family that had never truly seen me. We made good on our promise and booked the wedding venue, a quiet vineyard in Sonoma. Just close friends and a few colleagues we trusted. No family drama, no guilt, No compromises. Naomi even offered to officiate, which made me tear up more than I expected. She wasn't just my attorney anymore, she had become something closer to a sister than blood ever gave me. Mason, on the other hand, faded from my life in the most ironic way possible, not with rage or threats, but with pathetic, whispered regret, through mutual acquaintances. I heard he'd lost his job once word got around. The fraud verdict made him radioactive in finance, and without my parents able to sweep things under the rug anymore, he spiraled. His girlfriend left him. He moved in with our parents. I didn't feel joy at his downfall. Not really. What I felt was more like vindication, that quiet, steady sense that justice had finally caught up with the story. Then came the unexpected part. I began to feel lighter. My laughter returned, not the polite, guarded chuckles I used to ration around family, but real, belly-deep joy. I'd laugh with Marcus at burnt pancakes, or with Naomi over glasses of wine, or sometimes just by myself at nothing in particular. I painted again, something I hadn't done since college. I enrolled in a community writing workshop. I found myself making friends, real ones who liked me not because I played a part, but because I was. Finally, just me. My parents sent a letter a few weeks later, a real one, handwritten. It was from my mother. Pages and pages of tangled emotions, anger, shame, denial, and somewhere, buried in the margins, a line that read, "We miss you," but it wasn't followed by, "We're sorry." It wasn't followed by, "We were wrong." It was, as always, a cry for compliance, not connection. I didn't respond, because I had finally realized something that took 28 years to learn. Family isn't owed, it's earned. Love isn't unconditional when it's weaponized to demand silence. And forgiveness doesn't mean reopening wounds for the sake of someone else's comfort. In time, I changed my number, moved to a different city, started over. Not as someone who was running, but someone who was finally free to choose. I now live in a small town outside Portland, with a balcony overlooking trees and a morning fog that feels like a clean slate every day. Marcus and I walk to the farmer's market every Saturday. We're thinking about adopting a dog. We keep our circle small, but it's strong. Some nights I look back not with bitterness, but with clarity. I think about how long I begged to be seen, how I twisted myself into shapes that would fit a mold never meant for me, and I smile, because I finally stopped trying. And maybe that's the real revenge, not the lawsuit, not the public disgrace, not even the court-ordered compensation. The real revenge is that I'm living well, without them, without fear, without shame. And I wouldn't trade that peace for anything, not even a perfect Thanksgiving toast. Story 3. My name is Elena Moore. I'm 25, and 3 months ago, my sister destroyed my world. Until then. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had my routines, my dreams, a man I believed in, and a family I thought I understood. Cold, perhaps, but still mine. My older sister Megan, 27, had always been the family favorite. She was the golden child, beautiful, magnetic, destined for success. I was the quiet one, the too sensitive one, the one who always got told to understand, to give in, to wait my turn. Growing up, I swallowed that narrative like it was medicine. I watched Megan shine while I learned how to make myself smaller to make space for her. And I really believed, despite everything, that she loved me, that we were close, that I could trust her. Jason, my boyfriend of nearly 4 years, was the first man who made me feel seen. He wasn't flashy or poetic, but he was dependable, kind in quiet ways. We talked about marriage. He met my grandparents before they passed and held my hand through their funerals. He knew about the trust they left me. Though we rarely talked about it, I kept it separate, sacred. Jason never asked about it, and I took that as proof he loved me for me. But things shifted around spring. Jason started getting distant. He became vague about where he was going, flinched when I asked small questions, smiled less. I felt it, something rotting beneath the surface, but I told myself it was stress. He was tired. I didn't want to be that girlfriend. Then one night, he left his phone on the coffee table and went to the bathroom. I swear I wasn't snooping, but a message lit up the screen. From Megan. "I'm late." I froze. The room spun. Against every instinct, I opened the thread. What I found nearly unmade me. Months of messages, photos, confessions, inside jokes turned intimate, and then the bombshell. We need to tell her soon. I want to raise this baby with you. I confronted them the next day. Jason broke like a branch, crying and stammering, but Megan, she looked at me with this terrifying serenity and said, "It just happened. You wouldn't understand. We're soulmates." Like she was asking me to be happy for her. I was speechless, numb. But what truly destroyed something inside me wasn't them. It was my parents. When I told them what happened, they didn't scream or console me. They rationalized. Family makes mistakes. You two have always been so close. You can't just throw blood away. Elena, they wanted me to forgive and move on, help Megan through her pregnancy. They even implied I was being selfish. So that night, I packed my things. I moved in with Chloe, my best friend, a civil rights attorney who'd always said my family reminded her of a cold boardroom. I told her everything. We sat on her kitchen floor drinking cheap wine while I cried until I couldn't feel my face. And when I was done, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You owe them nothing." But they weren't done, not even close. A week later, my mother called, sugarcoating her voice like poison in honey. "Elena," she said, "you know Megan's going to need help raising the baby. You've always had such a kind heart. Maybe you could share some of your inheritance. It's the right thing to do." I didn't reply. I hung up. But that call was just the beginning. After that call, I thought maybe they'd leave it at that one desperate attempt to guilt me. Then radio silence. But I underestimated how deep entitlement can run. Within days, the texts started. First from Mom, then Megan, then, disturbingly, Jason. They all had the same tone-sweetened manipulation. "Family matters most. You're stronger than this. Elena, don't let money tear us apart." The irony almost made me laugh. Almost. Then came the voicemails. My father's voice, which I hadn't heard in weeks, low and grave, said, "Your sister's struggling. The least you can do is help her." The least. As if I hadn't spent my whole life giving up pieces of myself for them. As if my betrayal, yes, my betrayal was choosing to stop bleeding for them. When that didn't work, they escalated. My mother showed up at my office. I had just gotten back from lunch when my coworker leaned over and said, "There's a woman in the lobby asking for you. Says it's urgent." I walked out and saw her lipsticked smile, tears already brimming. "Elena, honey, can we talk?" I turned on my heel without saying a word. The receptionist, God bless her, blocked my mother from following me back inside. That night, Chloe and I sat on her couch as I read the latest barrage of messages. Megan's tone had shifted from sweet to sharp. "You're punishing an innocent baby," she texted. "You'll regret this when you're alone and childless." Then came the final twist. "We might have to take legal action if you keep withholding what's rightfully family money." I showed it to Chloe. She snorted. "That's not a thing. They're just throwing legal buzzwords around. They don't have a case." Elena. But the idea that they thought they had a claim over me, over my grief fund, my future, my peace was the last straw. So I made my move. Over the next few days, I initiated the exit plan I had quietly designed with Chloe's help. I accepted a remote job offer from a creative agency in Denver. I hired a moving company. I broke my lease. I set up a trust protector on my inheritance. Placing it under an LLC that couldn't be traced to my name, I opened a P.O. box. I bought a new SIM card, no forwarding address, no breadcrumbs. Then I disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't announce it. I just left. My last act of communication was a single email sent to my parents, Megan and Jason. It read, "I have nothing left to give. Don't contact me again." That was it. No goodbye, no explanation, just freedom, cold and clean. The day I crossed state lines, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. The sun over Colorado was sharper, more honest. I moved into a tiny apartment overlooking the Rockies, filled it with plants and light, and let myself cry not because I missed them, but because I was finally allowed to stop performing for their love. But I wasn't naive. I knew silence wouldn't stop them. And I was right. Just 1 week later, something happened that proved exactly how far they were willing to go to pull me back. A week into my new life in Denver, I was starting to breathe again. I had decorated my apartment with nothing but thrift store finds and secondhand books, but it already felt more like home than any place I'd ever lived. I was learning to love silence, not the heavy silence of disappointment, but the gentle, healing kind. My new job was intense but fulfilling, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth to anyone. My therapist, yes, I finally started therapy, said I was experiencing something called post-traumatic clarity. It's the strange, sudden recognition that what you thought was normal was actually slow, constant harm. That realization hit hard, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Is this Elena Moore?" the voice asked. My stomach turned. "This is Officer Dwyer from the Chicago Police Department. You were recently reported missing. We just want to confirm you're okay." I blinked. What? I'm not missing. I moved. I'm fine. I gave him the details. After a pause, he said, almost under his breath, "Figured as much. Happens more than you'd think." He closed the report. I thanked him and hung up, my hands trembling. They reported me missing. Not because they feared for my safety, but because I dared to go no contact. It was a performance. A trap. Another attempt to pull me back under their thumb. Later that night, Chloe called. "Check your email," she said. I opened the thread and stared at screenshots forwarded from an old friend back home. Megan had posted a picture of the baby soft pink hat, wrinkled face, and tagged my old Facebook profile with a long caption that read like a sermon. "We don't know where my sister is. She's abandoned us in our time of need. Family forgives. Family shows up. But she just left. Pray for us." Shh. It had likes, comments, support. One woman even called me cold-hearted. I deleted the account. The next few days were quiet until I received a group message from a new number. It was Megan again. "You should be this baby's godmother," she wrote. "You owe her that much." She included a photo of the child and a paragraph-long rant about sisterhood, destiny, and how I needed to come home before it's too late. I stared at the message for a long time before blocking the number. Then my father tried to call. I didn't answer. A few hours later, he left a voicemail equal parts threat and plea. "We'll pursue legal action if you continue to ignore your responsibilities. Megan's struggling. You have the means to help. That money was never just yours." He said it with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. It chilled me. I played it again and sent it straight to my lawyer. Later that evening, I stood on my balcony with a cup of mint tea, watching the sun settle behind the mountains. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who would have returned that call, the one who would have apologized for their betrayal, who would have handed over her future to buy forgiveness she never should have had to earn. That girl was gone. But the people who broke her, they weren't finished yet. What came next wasn't just a desperate act. It was war. The war began not with fire, but with a letter. A real certified letter sent to my P.O. box and forwarded through my legal service. It looked official, wrapped in the kind of beige envelope that makes your stomach knot just from the texture of the paper. Inside, a printed letter from a law office back in Illinois. At least, that's what it pretended to be. It wasn't from any licensed firm. It was signed by someone I later learned was a family friend who once did small claims paperwork for my uncle's roofing business. The contents: a full-page guilt manifesto, dressed up in legal jargon, but hollow on inspection. You have a moral and social obligation to your family, particularly to your sister and her newborn daughter. It read, "Given your financial situation and Megan's need, we strongly encourage you to provide monthly support to ensure the baby's well-being. Should you fail to act, we reserve the right to explore legal remedies to compel cooperation." I blinked. Compel cooperation. What world were they living in? I sent it to my lawyer, Brian, a man who had seen every flavor of manipulative family dynamics. He called me within the hour, barely suppressing laughter. "This isn't a lawsuit," he said. "It's emotional blackmail on legal letterhead. I'll handle it." And he did. Within a day, his office sent a formal cease and desist. The lawyer never responded. That silence said everything. But the hits kept coming not from courts, but from whispers, through the grapevine. I started hearing stories. Megan telling people I was cruel, that I'd run away in shame, that I refused to help because I was jealous of what? Exactly. No one could explain. Jason, the ghost of betrayal past, had apparently moved on to a new woman and was entirely absent from the child's life. Then, the biggest twist, Megan had quietly done a DNA test, and Jason wasn't the father. Let that sit for a moment. He wasn't the father. I don't know what was more shocking, the lie she built, or the fact that she had no idea who the father was. According to mutual acquaintances, she confessed she had a wild phase and thought it would be better if Jason just believed it was his. So much for soulmates. Now she was back at my parents' house, single, unemployed, with a baby she hadn't prepared for and no clue how to navigate real life. And my parents, those champions of family above all, were floundering too. They'd apparently hoped guilt-tripping me would turn into financial salvation. When it didn't, they began unraveling. My father tried to borrow money from his siblings. My mother allegedly told a neighbor, "Elena always was ungrateful. You raise a child, and they repay you by disappearing." Ungrateful, I had sacrificed birthdays, friendships, college trips, pieces of myself so they could keep Megan shining. I had covered for her screw-ups, handed over my share, kept the peace, and when she shattered everything I had, they still expected me to play the martyr. But I didn't, not this time. Instead, I built something new myself. My apartment was now warm and lived in, not just furnished but loved. I was volunteering at a local shelter on weekends. I joined a hiking group. My boss had already promoted me to a team lead role. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, free of manipulation, free of performance, free of them. One morning, while sipping coffee on the balcony, I watched a hawk glide over the pines and thought, this is what peace tastes like. But even peace has echoes, and sometimes those echoes come back bearing new names, new faces, and a new kind of test. About 3 weeks after that letter fiasco, I thought the storm had finally passed. The cease and desist worked. The phone had been quiet, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night without dreams turning into courtrooms or old bedrooms. My balcony became my sanctuary. Every morning, I drank my coffee there, letting silence fill the spaces where once obligation screamed. I was healing slowly, surely. Then came the knock. Not a text, not a call, a knock, physical, direct, real. It was a Tuesday morning. I was working from home, hair tied up, sweatpants, coffee in hand. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I froze when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole stood a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, holding a folder. Not police, not a neighbor, but something told me she wasn't selling anything. When I opened the door a crack, she smiled too kindly, too rehearsed. "Elena," she asked, "I'm with Child Protective Services. Do you have a moment?" My heart dropped into my stomach. She explained calmly, with the kind of voice people use when they're used to seeing wreckage, that an anonymous tip had been submitted about concerning behavior and emotional instability. The claim that I had a history of violence, abandonment, and potential mental health issues stemming from childhood trauma, and that I might pose a threat to children. Someone, somewhere, had tried to frame me. And while the report was vague, CPS was obligated to follow up. I felt myself go cold, then hot, then cold again. I invited her in, let her look around, answered every question with calm precision. I handed her my therapist's business card, my clean record, my sealed court records about the trust, even emails from my lawyer. She nodded along, taking notes. And after 30 minutes she stood, shook my hand, and said, "Honestly, it looks like you're the one who got away from something toxic. I'm sorry you're still being punished for surviving." She left. I stood in the middle of my living room, shaking, not because I was afraid, but because I realized something. They weren't trying to come back into my life. They were trying to ruin what I had built without them. Their final weapon wasn't words or guilt, it was sabotage. But even that failed. And that failure, in some twisted way, felt like the truest proof of my strength. The next day, I filed for a civil restraining order. I gave the court everything: texts, letters, voicemails, the CPS visit report. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protection. A clean break. The judge agreed. The order was granted permanent, enforceable across state lines. And like that, it was over. Now, When I walk down the street in my new town, I'm just another woman carrying groceries or heading to yoga. No one knows my past. No one whispers in aisles or texts behind my back. I'm free, not just legally, but spiritually. My therapist said something recently that stayed with me. Closure isn't about getting the apology. It's about making peace with the absence of one. I never got the apology, but I did get peace. And in the end, I realized that's all I ever needed. And just when I thought that would be the end of it, of everything, a letter arrived that wasn't from my family. But what it contained would change everything I thought I knew about how this all started.